Welcome to the insurance series by Confio. Today, we have Alex Kerti from Emergence. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Alex, I'm keen to chat to you about cyber. Naturally, Emergence is, a cyber insurance specialist. Now, before we dive into that, a lot of this podcast is centered around the individual, your background, how you got to where you got to, and specifically how you got into insurance. And then we can dive into the cyber-specific elements.
Yep.
But tell us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are today.
It's quite a story. When I was in high school, I was actually really interested in media and I really wanted to work in advertising, but I always had an interest in tech and predominantly data around marketing. So I went to UTS and I studied advertising. There were some core subjects that I absolutely loved. So I loved big data, looking at data analytics. And so when I graduated, I went into marketing for a little bit, but predominantly in the account manager space. So always in some kind of a sales function. And then I leveraged my skills into going into the tech space and predominantly succeeded in a global marcom company. And so after a couple of years there, I obviously started to notice major cyber events occurring in the country. My interest in tech and data really led me to kind of look into these cyber events, I should say. And then it was a colleague of mine who actually introduced me and exposed me to the insurance space. And she started talking to me about cyber insurance. And it was so interesting to me because it was something that I'd never thought of. But when I really took a step back and realized that, the computer's been the main operational tool used in every single business for at least the past 20 years. And 90% of an entire business's infrastructure is IT. And this was something that wasn't insured or protected, yet the bricks and mortar were. It sparked my interest. So then I was introduced to Emergence after a series of conversations. I was offered a role. And it's been history since. It's been amazing. It's such a good company to work for.
And so how long has it been that you've been in insurance so far?
Almost 2 years now.
Yeah, great. And so no insurance history or
No.
experience, no family in insurance per se?
No, nothing.
You either hear that people fall into insurance or they knew someone in insurance and that's why they got into it, right? So interesting to hear your background in that sense.
Yeah.
And then tell us a little bit about Emergence. Obviously, Emergence has been around for a little while.
Yeah.
And obviously experiencing rapid growth, as is the cyber landscape in general. But tell us a little bit about Emergence.
Absolutely. So Emergence is the first locally established cyber underwriting agency in Australia. This year marks 10 years in the industry. So it's quite incredible to work for a company where we only specialize in cyber. And to think about the fact that this was established 10 years ago means that we are truly specialists in that space. And it's all we have ever been doing. When you also begin to consider like the claim statistics and data that we're able to house as well, what that shows us for the Australian cyber threat landscape is quite alarming, but also very interesting and helps govern the way in which we rate risks, the way in which we look to the future for future cover as well to introduce. And all of this data also feeds into other national reports we provide the government and so on and so forth. So it's quite an important area to be involved in my opinion.
And you mentioned the government. Is it quite a collaborative approach between Emergence and, I guess, other bodies, regulatory bodies?
Yeah, look, it depends in what sense. If we're talking about from an incident response perspective, absolutely. So we have an in-house incident response team, which is potentially something we can delve into more detail a bit later. But we will liaise with the OEIC and certain, members of the government where needed.
Yeah.
So they do know Emergence quite well in that respect. But I think there is a bit of a disparity between where cyber insurance largely sits and governance, so to speak, which is obviously federated.
Yeah, and look, I will say, to add to that, I think, sure, Emergence has been around for 10 years, but Emergence has also done a really good job at merging industry and the insurance industry as well as the tech industry together. I think Emergence has spent quite a bit of time on brand development around the two different spaces and merging that together.
Yes.
Because I guess insurance can be quite historical and merging the two is not necessarily something that has been done all that well in the past. I think so. It's been good to see that in that sense.
Absolutely.
And you guys have been quite involved with industry bodies and associations and doing some presentations and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key things is we have quite a broad appetite. So we have partnered with the IT and MSP community for quite some time now. We do feel really aligned to that space. I mean, we are working in cyber, so why aren't we ensuring that industry, right, or that profession? I think in the beginning there was a bit of headbutting, a bit of clash around cyber insurance when it first came to fruition.
Yeah.
Is this real? Is it a gimmick? Do you need it? And we didn't want to encroach on the IT contractor's role within the business. But I think as we've matured, as we've seen cyber events and data breaches in the country really expand and happen more severely and frequently, the IT contractor as well as businesses have really come to realize that cyber insurance and the IT industry are a partnership.
Yeah.
We pick up the financial loss that a business experiences. They're there and responsible for mitigating technical controls, so to speak. So to answer your question, we have been going to a lot of association events, being asked to partner with the IT community. And I mean, in turn, we've just launched our own IT liability product, which is called Tech Event Protection. And that's going exceptionally well. So yeah, we're very much involved in that space.
And we can jump into cyber coverage a little bit later on, because no doubt some of the listeners will want to know what cyber covers, because as you said, I think historically some people within the IT community did see it as a bit of a threat around cyber insurance. Obviously there's been a lot of movement since then, which is fantastic to see. However, there was quite a bit of contention around what does cyber actually cover, and is it worth the piece of paper that it's written on? We'll touch on coverage elements a little bit later on, but let's go through the landscape per se. That's obviously shifted quite a bit in the last 10 years, but also even more so. I was underwriting cyber insurance almost 15 years ago, so it's been around for a long time. But there's been quite a bit of movement. So give us a little bit of a snapshot in the landscape and how that's changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two landscapes to consider. It's the threat landscape and then also the cyber insurance landscape itself. In terms of the threat landscape in Australia, it's obviously clear the media is driving a lot of these events, right? We've had Qantas recently, which everyone's talking about. Unfortunately, I was a victim of that. I don't know if you were as well.
6 million records.
6 million records.
I've received 4 phone calls so far from scammers trying to get me, but yeah.
So, I mean, Optus, Medibank, Latitude, these are the major things we always hear about, right? But these bigger logos in Australia are becoming more frequent. You've got MediSecure, 12.9 million pieces of data, JB Hi-Fi, UNSW, Ticketek, Ticketmaster, now Qantas, all within the span of a year. So obviously this is happening more frequently. And basically what is happening is when these incidents occur, it is us, the individual Australian, that is ultimately the victim. So personal identifiable information, sensitive information and records are harvested. Then they're used to hit us with scams, right? So all the text messages that you get from Toll, from Woolworths, from anything are those ongoing phishing scams. In that sense, big logos are great to help build awareness and momentum, but what we're seeing is a huge increase in micro, small and medium businesses getting hit. Now, when you begin to look at data, I mean, you can really point to the ASD, the Signals Directorate. So they quoted something like 87,000 reports of cybercrime in FY24. That's quite an alarming number, but genuinely that's like the tip of the iceberg. So they're just the people or businesses that have chosen to notify that they had been a victim. When you look at the total cumulative loss of that, it's roughly about $84 million lost to businesses from cybercrime. And each individual, so an individual citizen that was impacted had lost $30,000. Now that's just one report. Other reports will tell you that there's been a total of $2 billion in scams and fraud lost to individuals in the country in 2024. So the landscape in itself is red hot at the moment. When you start to look at cyber insurance, there's more competitors coming to our shores. Cyber insurance in Australia is somewhat untapped, so to speak. We are very late to the forefront of cyber protection, cyber security, and now cyber insurance. But ultimately, I'd say that there's still 4 main runners that have always been present in Australia. And we will see more people come and make their way into the country. But we are definitely in a very, very soft market that's being felt by all cyber insurers and potentially other lines as well.
Yeah.
So in short, premiums are down. Never been a better time to buy cyber. And so if you're a business owner listening, I think now's the time that you try to make that move.
And it's really interesting how you've, summarized that, because what we see quite a lot with business owners out there is you see a big brand like Qantas being breached. Micro SME businesses still believe that they're not going to be a victim of the cybercrime. So there is this notion that, she'll be right, that the usual she'll be right attitude. So it is a bit hard to see sometimes these big brands getting breached and then it really leading to nowhere potentially with some businesses going, what was the loss? And so when they review some of these reports too, I think it's sometimes hard for them to digest as well, right? Which is why obviously advisors like us exist to try and help educate clients on what the risks are and why cyber insurance is such a relevant piece and why it's so important. But are there any other what is Emergence necessarily seeing from a data perspective? Because naturally, sure, everyone talks about the big brand, big logos, but from a numbers perspective, if that's something that you can share, what does it look like on that micro SME side of things?
Yeah. So, the largest makeup of our book, predominantly I work in SME, so 0 to 250 mil revenue. That is the largest portion of our book, right? So we do work a lot with the micro, small industry space. Statistically speaking, there was a survey done across Australia, and 90% of all businesses that exist in Australia fall within the small to medium category. So that speaks volumes. Now, arguably, what's the take-up of cyber insurance in Australia is a good benchmark to start. I'd have to hazard a guess at maybe 10%. Of that, we have the largest lion's share. So we do have the largest book of cyber insurance in the country. We have seen year-on-year increase of 20% on claims count. So 2023 compared to 2024, 20% increase in claims coming through the door. Now, mind you, that's despite security controls becoming better. So people implementing minimum foundational controls, the numbers are still coming through the door. To bring it back down to June 2025, just to give you some statistics, 53 claims in June 2025. That's about 13 a week. So we're seeing huge amounts of ransomware, social engineered theft, as you'd expect, but a lot of really interesting things happening. And also, I guess this speaks to the broadness or the breadth of cyber insurance. A lot of internal errors and miscellaneous errors. So an example is a disgruntled employee leaking the salaries of everyone to their colleagues, or someone finding a password and gaining access and manipulating information. All of this would still be classified as a data breach and requires that response and cover, but maybe a different way of thinking about how broad cyber insurance actually is. But 53 claims in June is quite substantial, and it just continues to increase. And the way that we're trending so far this year is well and truly within that 20% increase bracket.
And tell me a little bit about, I guess, ransomware particularly. As you mentioned, with, protection measures improving, more and more clients relying on backups, daily backups now. The requirement for ransomware protection in instances seems like it's not always required if you can rely on the backup, right? But you're still seeing claims in that space, right?
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing now is a major shift because, year ago you'd see the skulls and crossbones appear and everything's encrypted and demanding a ransom. But now we're just seeing, PII being taken or data being harvested and that being held in exchange for a ransom. So there's a lot of sensitive data that is being retrieved. And I think this also plays into the government playing a huge role and putting a huge focus and spotlight on data governance and putting the onus of that back onto the business owner. So data governance is absolutely should be a board level conversation and definitely is for large corporations. But taking into account small businesses and sole traders, considering what data you hold, how it's stored, where it's stored, what protections you have in place is absolutely paramount. Ransom in itself, look, roughly about 10 to 15% of all ransomware attacks we experience do result in some form of payment. And that's a whole nother conversation if you want to go into it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is quite a bit of spotlight around payments of ransom.
Correct.
And so on. Can you shed a little bit of light as to, I guess, its viability, potentially how that looks and what that might look like in the future?
Yeah. Look, I think the first thing you need to consider is who are we paying the ransom to? So before any ransom is paid, you have to conduct a sanction check to make sure that that particular group is not backed by a state entity or we're not fueling the proceeds of crime, despite the fact that realistically you probably are, right? Yeah. Then if all is in order, then you can kind of go through the processes and procedures, obviously with strict legal counsel as to how you may proceed and what you can and can't do. I'm not going to say it's legal to pay a ransom, but it's not illegal. So you can interpret that however you want. If they're found out to be a part of some kind of sanctioned entity, then you may be able to act under duress. But this is where I might stop and a lawyer would jump in to help. But I think they're very important things to consider. An incident response plan, which is potentially something we can talk about down the track, is where you might really exercise that whole response around ransomware, because it is the most crucial type of attack that might occur, seizing your entire business, extracting all of your sensitive data. And just one thing I might add there, so 77% of all BI claims for us are led by ransomware. So there's a bit of a statistic for you too.
Interesting. And we can dive into coverage in a minute, and particularly what incident response is, because I still think clients misunderstand that the ability of the insurer's incident response to form part of their disaster recovery plan.
Sure.
But interestingly, you spoke about businesses that are targeted for ransomware. A lot of them, you'd see the skulls and the bones, but just holding personal information. What we've seen is businesses that have a reputation to uphold, right? Yep. Which is 99% of those businesses that you would speak to on a daily basis. They have a reputation that's important to them. And if it were to be shown that their clients' details were in the open because of a breach of theirs, that's something they want to protect against for sure. And that's why ransomware comes into handy. You also mentioned social engineering, right? And this is obviously, we're kind of delving into coverage a little bit here, or what an policy will cover. But we've seen a fair few social engineering claims with our clients in the past. Do you want to briefly touch on what social engineering is and how it's relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. Social engineering is when the insured receives an invoice that has been manipulated and they pay that invoice in good faith. But obviously the money is redirected to a different account. There's also push payment theft, which we're seeing a lot of and is covered within our policy. And that is when the insured is hacked and a fraudulent invoice is sent from the insured's account to a third party or a vendor. So there is that direct loss of funds there. Many industries rely on the payment of invoices, construction, blue-collar industries, labour hire, whatever you want to name it. You are relying on the payment of invoices constantly and very frequently. So it is very easy to be duped or manipulated into paying a fraudulent invoice. And if you don't have the correct processes and procedures in place as a business, the chances of that happening are highly likely. Now, I guess like 68% of most instances or cyber events that we experience, I should say claims, are human related. So despite all the security measures you can invest in, if your staff do not know what cyber safety is, what protocols and procedures to follow, if maybe they don't call to check change of bank details before processing payment, there's a large chance that you're going to fall victim, unfortunately.
Let me tell you why I like this coverage, right? Because some clients might say, well, if someone breaches our system and changes bank account details on an invoice and sends that to a third party and the third party pays that claim, that third party is the one that's losing that money. Yep. Maybe they should have called us to double check those bank details.
Yep.
What we see in practice is when it comes to reputation, clients don't want to have that argument with their end client. It gets really hairy when they're going to their client saying, hey, I know you've lost $50,000, but it's not our problem. You should have had some checks and balances to make sure that didn't happen. And so I think this coverage that you mentioned really helps the client get ahead of it to save a third-party claim, a liability claim occurring in the future as well. So I think that's super important. And you kind of mentioned staff training. When it comes to cyber risk, staff training is super important. You mentioned people risk. That is the number one risk that we see with clients, whether you're clicking on a malicious piece of software on an email, whatever it might be. I think that's a large portion of what the claims look like that we've seen. I don't know if you've got any numbers around percentage of claims, but I think it'd be pretty up there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a percentage if you want it.
Go.
So the Verizon data breach report is a really good data report if anyone wants to take a read. In 2024, they examined roughly about 38,000 cyber events that happen around the world. 68% of them were human related. So again, people clicking on links, people paying invoices, people releasing data accidentally, maybe CCing a bunch of people instead of BCCing. Very easy to slip up, and there's no patch for humans, unfortunately.
Crazy. Two thirds of claims that we see there. That's outstanding. Talk to us about coverage. And obviously, we won't talk broadly about all policies. Naturally, we can just talk about what Emergence covers. Talk to us about the sections, what the intention roughly is to cover and what the benefit is for clients.
Yeah, it's quite comprehensive and incredibly broad. So for any business owners out there, hopefully it makes some very clear sense. But the SME product, cyber event protection, covers anyone $0 to $250 million turnover. Section A covers any direct losses to that business. So if a cyber event or system failure occurs within your business that causes a direct decline in revenue or also causes any impact to your IT contractor's business, the policy will immediately respond. So this is where we see BI. So it's quite broad in the sense that anything that constitutes a decline in revenue as a result of a cyber event is covered. So things like reputational harm. Now, what could that mean? That could mean loss of customers, loss of contracts, loss of business, loss of partnerships. If I click on a link and all of a sudden my business is shut down for a week or prolonged for 2-3 weeks, that is immediate decline in revenue. My business stops because once again, we're relying on IT network infrastructure to even operate, right? All of that is calculated, assessed, and covered. We also go far beyond that to include things like preventative shutdown, system failure, which is incredibly broad compared to the market. It's all perils. So any global spread, global outage, anything like that is absolutely covered by our policy. Or any increased costs of working to keep the business afloat.
You know what I like about that is a lot of clients think they don't have a cyber risk if they're not online. A lot of that coverage that you've just mentioned isn't an online risk exposure. A direct financial loss, from a cyber event can happen to any business effectively. And particularly as businesses start to rely more on technology, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer really. Did you mention all the sections?
No, not yet. There is a section B covers any claims brought against the insured. So if a cyber event occurs, as a result, you have claims brought against you, then we cover any settlements, fines, regulatory fines, penalties, basically defense costs, I like to call them. We also cover multimedia injury and payment card industry liability. And section C is basically the safety net to the policy and the reason you have cyber insurance in place, and that is cyber event response costs. So when an event occurs, we genuinely cover everything associated with remediation, getting the business back up and running. So things like legal, ensuring that you have the best privacy lawyers involved from day dot to make sure that all the processes and procedures are followed correctly, and all that advice is provided. things like DFRI, forensics, a negotiator, ransom payment, that is also covered, mind you. So it's far broad, and whatever needs to happen is covered.
And this is what we kind of alluded to earlier, where when a business or an SME business deals with their outsourced IT provider, they might build them some form of a disaster recovery plan or incident response plan to some degree. And then the client buys some cyber insurance, and they don't always have the conversation to ensure that it relies upon the insurer's incident response plan. And so, as you kind of mentioned, this incident response plan, there's a 1-800 number that the client can call, and immediately there are a team of cyber professionals that can help with the response to get you back up to where you need to be.
Yeah, literally.
And often we see the words third party and first party thrown around, and some clients don't really understand that. First party being these incident response costs.
Correct.
The costs that you would incur to get back to where you need to get to, or understand what the damage or loss is. Third party being when someone brings a claim against you for that loss. And that would more so be Section A of that policy. Out of interest, across Section A, B, and C, what we've seen in our space, we've seen a large percentage of claims being in the Section C of that policy, incident response. That is first party costs. That is, regardless of anyone bringing a claim against you, being able to understand who's been in your system for how long, how do we get some PR consultants to respond to this. A large part of, or large portion of claims have been in incident response first party costs, very little in the third party or regulatory fines and penalties. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. But what we see cumulatively is 85% of all claims trigger Section A and C. So that's BI and incident response. So again, the two most crucial areas of the policy, make sure that financially you are recovered and you have technical people there involved to get the business remediated, back up and running, and minimizing that loss entirely. So I think that that's really important, that whoever the cyber provider is that you're working with, make sure that those two areas of the policy are tried and tested and broad.
Yeah, perfect. And I guess when we talk to clients, our role really is to help clients, one, understand the product, understand the key risks they have firstly.
Correct.
Help them understand what the key risks are, and then educate them on what products are available to mitigate that risk.
Yeah. Now, with the coverage of the policy, there's also optional covers that we include, and it really just depends on the type of business and the advice that the insurance broker needs to provide. But they are things like criminal financial loss and social engineering theft. We also provide tangible property cover up to the full aggregate limit as selected. So that is the replacement of tangible IT-related hardware, computers, laptops, on-prem servers, whatever it is that might need to be replaced. We have a D&O extension, so that accompanies your existing D&O policy, and we provide that up to $1 million cover. So if any pursuits are brought against directors and officers specifically due to a cyber event or a cyber wrongful act, they do have that cover there to protect them. And lastly, non-IT contingent business interruption. So within the core policy, we cover your IT contractor and your data processor. That is already included. The optional cover is purely for non-IT suppliers that a business might rely on. So an example is a tradie that relies on certain tools to be delivered to him or materials. If they have an outage and they go down, that's an example of contingent business interruption. So it really depends on the makeup of the business.
Perfect. That's kind of where I was alluding to anyway. As a broker, as an advisor, our role is really to identify what those key risks are. Purchasing a product off the shelf isn't enough. It's a great start, but there are some optional coverages like that you've just mentioned that advisors need to talk clients through. Not all of those optional extensions are going to be relevant to a client. They may not have physical assets that they need to get insured necessarily from a cyber event. But being able to understand what those risks are and getting clear on how the client can move that risk to an insurer is most certainly of benefit.
Yeah.
From there, we then talk to clients about how do we reduce that risk so that we can reduce our premium or effectively make the insurer more comfortable with the risk so that we can get a better outcome for our clients. And so what are some of the, underwriting risk measures that Emergence would look for to improve that risk and or improve the premium?
Yeah. So look, the first thing, like I said, I mean, your first line of defense is staff awareness training. That's genuinely one of the first questions on the prop form. Do you provide it? How frequently would you provide it? We just need people just to start having conversations inside the business about cybersecurity, about cyber awareness, processes and procedures. It's quite broad to interpret what cyber awareness training means, but as long as it's being conducted, you are automatically reducing your risk tenfold. Second thing that we're looking for typically is patch management, which is a fancy term for potentially software updates, making sure that everything, all the IT-related programs and softwares, SaaS tools that you're using are regularly updated as needed. Second thing might be MFA, multi-factor authentication. The government doing a great job at the moment at promoting this on TV and on the radio. Multi-factor authentication is typically free in most instances and deters many events from occurring. So having that included in your remote access, web-based email, cloud resources or privileged accounts always helps. And your last line of defense is your backups. So if all goes belly up, if you don't have anything, at least have backups. So we have something to recover the business and get the business back up and running immediately just to eliminate BI. But I think, what's happening is the landscape is shifting, and with heightened competition in the cyberspace, there are a few providers asking less questions, fewer questions, or being a bit more agile. But in terms of mitigating risk, that's a really interesting comment that you make because, our stance is really that IT risk or cyber risk needs to first be mitigated internally by the business owner. The business owner or the board, whatever it is, depending on the size of the business, needs to take it seriously and needs to implement measures internally to mitigate risk because it is a business risk. It's not a cyber risk, it's a business risk. Secondly, you mitigate or offset the remainder of that risk through insurance. Whatever can't be picked up from technical controls is then leveraged and offset into insurance, which is typically how insurance works. So in saying that, we are looking for those minimum foundational settings. If you can't implement them or you don't have means to implement them, we do provide you with an additional service to help you. So we are really in the process of just educating and helping uplift cyber awareness across the country, particularly for those micros and small businesses because they need it.
And so what's the additional service? Is this CyberSuite?
It's CyberSuite, yes.
Tell us more about CyberSuite.
About a year and a half ago, we launched our own cybersecurity company or cyber advisory company to be more specific. And we just saw a need because there's so many businesses, smaller businesses like you mentioned, that maybe don't have that IT person. They don't know how to even get started. They have no one to talk to. So our cyber advisory company will meet with a prospective client or an existing client for free and basically talk them through the proposal form, talk them through their business risk, provide them with that advice, maybe point them in the right direction, put them in touch with someone that can help just to make sure that they are aware, their knowledge is uplifted, and they're able to uplift or implement those additional security measures. And we can go into it a bit more detail later, but there are a string of other services that they provide for free.
Yeah. And this is where I think the insurer and the broker can really work hand in hand because,
Correct.
Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's an education process for many of these clients around what their key risks are and how they can mitigate it around using some of these risk measures to ensure that it is mitigated and or obtain some coverage. Part of that education process is having clients understand any regulatory or legal changes that are occurring that they need to be aware of. A recent one is obviously the 3 million threshold and the obligatory requirement to notify all parties that have been breached. There are constantly various different amendments not constantly, there are occasionally amendments to the Privacy Act and different elements of the legal landscape. Do you want to touch on a little bit about some of the changes that we're seeing? Yeah,
absolutely. So there was recent reform to the Privacy Act, and our first Cybersecurity Act came into fruition in December of 2024. I think, again, the government have had to adopt a very aggressive stick approach to data compliance. Compliance is a funny word in this country in the cyberspace. You said obligation, and I completely agree with that. They are obligated. And look, essentially, the notifiable data breach scheme came into fruition in 2018, has since been slightly adjusted. But what that means for listeners is if your business turns over $3 million or above, then you are legally bound to notify the OAIC within 30 days of any breach. which is defined as unauthorized access to or unauthorized disclosure of one or more persons' personal information. You need to conduct that with a full report, if I'm not mistaken. And if someone is found to be in serious harm, then there may be penalties and fines introduced. And this is where that whole aggressive stick approach comes in play. So the minimum fine is $50 million. Now, if obviously you can't pay $50 million, it's 30% of your annual revenue. And then there's new fines and penalties introduced, such as an intrusion in privacy, which is really interesting. So the whole idea about big data, collecting as much data as possible is just really unnecessary, and that opens up publics to more incidents that may occur. An example is, imagine Woolworths, have your passport details. Why would they have that is the question, right? So only with withholding data that is absolutely necessary and mandatory. If something occurs, then there are a minimum $3 million fine, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a suite of other fines as well. I'm going to leave that to legal experts to delve into.
And you've mentioned fines, but also there are some costs involved with putting together a report.
Correct.
And notifying the individuals, right? Like, I don't know what the latest number is in terms of what it can cost per record, but I have seen numbers anywhere from $20 to $50 per record. Yeah. What are you seeing in your space?
It really depends, because there is not one event that is the same.
Yep.
It's very difficult to put to aggregated average out there. And it also really depends on who needs to be involved in that response. Notification, ID care, credit monitoring, you name it, all of this would be lumped into those kinds of costs. And they can really blow out extremely quickly, particularly if the incident is bad.
Let's talk about some scenarios. This is the juicy bit, right? Like, clients like to know about different scenarios. Can you talk about some claims examples that you've had recently that Emergence have managed?
Yeah, I've got two that come to mind. They're not one of the 53 that happened in June, but they're pretty exciting.
They're still ongoing.
One is, I think what I might actually quickly touch on before I go into it is kind of industries and targeted industries, which is quite interesting, because typically another connotation is a lot of people think that I don't hold sensitive information, or I don't work in professional services, so maybe I won't become a victim, but that's genuinely not the case. Doesn't matter if you're a rural land surveyor, in regional New South Wales, we've had those instances occur. It's remarkable. Yeah. But legal and the healthcare space is absolutely number one targeted industry. So this particular incident is a ransomware attack that occurred to a legal firm. Staff member went in as they normally do, and turned on their computer and was met with a funny note, but initially thought it was a joke. It wasn't until Wi-Fi was encrypted, work phone disabled, absolutely everything operationally had stopped. They crapped themselves as you would. IT manager running around frantically. They call the emergence incident response hotline, and within about 30 minutes, we're on a triage call with the CEO, IT contractor, Peter First, who's our head of incident response, and we've brought in IT forensics at that point, because obviously connecting the dots, it's a law firm, it's a ransomware attack, and they have sensitive PII. We come to find out that it's a $400,000 USD ransom that was demanded. Everything had been encrypted, everything had been extracted, everything in terms of sensitive data and information. So at this point in time, business has absolutely stopped. And you're unfortunately in the hands of someone based offshore. We came to find out that the backups had also been extracted. One of the crucial things, if anything, is make sure backups are segregated on a separate network, inaccessible. In this instance, they were tied to the same network. So when backups are extracted or seized, you have your hands tied at that point. Like, genuinely, there's no way to rebuild the business. So we go through the file tree and identify that absolutely everything within the organization had been extracted. We have to get a ransom negotiator involved who genuinely begins negotiating down from $400,000 USD. We have to provide extensive legal advice. And the CEO at this point is absolutely refusing to cooperate and believes that we should not be paying a threat actor any money. And obviously, moral standpoint, you would agree, right? We don't want to be fueling the proceeds of crime. but do we lose our 20-something $million company that we've put blood, sweat and tears into, or do we pay this person a couple $100,000 and potentially save our business? It turns out that we did have to make a payment. So that's the interesting part of this story. It turned out to be a $750,000 claim. A lot of it was the ransom itself. So we talked it down to 400,000 AUD, and the second highest cost was legal. So essentially we have to provide a lot of notification advice, a lot of legal counsel and legal support to make sure that the business has followed the processes and procedures adequately, and there are no repercussions as a result.
One of the interesting things you said just then was potentially saving a business, right? Because there's a fair bit of trust involved in, if you're going to pay this ransom, you got to trust that that perpetrator is going to, give you access to your system again, or they could potentially just delete it and run off with your money, right? So having dealt with some of these claims before, we're pretty well aware that your team are very well experienced in knowing, one, how to negotiate the claim, and two, who is on the other side to some degree, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And talk to us about how you go about paying a claim. Like, how do you pay a ransomware? Give us a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you don't get a BSB account number and transfer funds. Unfortunately, it's all done through Bitcoin. So, another thing to consider from a business owner's perspective is once all of this stuff is happening, you're a victim of a ransom, you're going through an incredibly stressful process, you don't know what's happening, and you have to pay someone in Bitcoin. Where do you get a Bitcoin wallet? How do you get Bitcoin funds? How do you transfer the funds to make sure it's safe? So these are all extra steps that the team need to take. And as I mentioned earlier, before paying the ransom, you have to go through serious sanction checks just to make sure you know who you're paying. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
So that was the claim, 750,000 in total, you said, for a law firm of what size?
I'm going to say roughly 16 million revenue.
Yeah, okay. So a decent sized business, but not a huge multinational.
Correct.
This is a medium sized business that has been targeted, but I think it's fair to say that smaller law firms are also just as at risk.
Absolutely.
And that's probably the hardest part, because the smaller law firms don't have as much of capital expenditure to spend on security, right? Yep. And so that's why it's super important to work with an advisor to look at, okay, well, what sort of security do you have? And as a final port of call, what sort of insurance can we put in place?
Correct, yeah.
You mentioned another claims example. What else do you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a $2 million construction company. And this is just a very simple social engineered theft scenario whereby someone receives an invoice, looks legit, makes the payment, paid to a third party, unfortunately, huge dispute over who owes what. And it turns out that there was a total of 20 invoices that had been fraudulent. That accumulated about $250,000 worth of fraudulent invoices that were then covered and paid. And while I'm on the topic of construction, there was one particular instance that we recently had whereby someone received an email which was a document, and it looked completely legitimate, like a PDF document that you would click and download. Unfortunately, it was malicious. So the threat actor had gained access into the mail environment of this particular business, basically pretending that they were working for the company, had sent out fraudulent invoices to every single one of the construction company's clients. And in that particular industry, there's obviously a high volume of payments being made every day. They started accruing payment after payment after payment. They went back with a second round of invoices because they were so confident. And it wasn't until someone picked up the phone to say, what's the second invoice for, that they had realized they had been compromised. Now, despite the fact that this third example is only a $10 million company, they were a government contractor. So the implications for this were every single construction site had to stop and had to be shut down for at least a week until the whole investigation was complete. They were rebuilt on a safe network. Everything was settled and they could go back and operate. So I think that the real interesting part here is someone clicking on a link, shutting down every construction site that they have in operation. So again, cyber genuinely does stretch far beyond what we think is a hacker causing a disruption.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest claim scenario that we see quite a lot is the social engineering component.
Yep.
And the construction space, unfortunately, is very high on that risk scenario because of the amount of invoices. We also see bookkeepers, accountants, lawyers who are also dealing with a number of different invoices that are subject to that. So there's definitely no bias to industry when it comes to people that are going to be perpetrated.
Yeah, I do not think industry matters at all, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah. Nor does size, and I think that's the interesting aspect. Despite some, legal amendments that we've spoken about, around 3 million being the number, it doesn't mean that you don't need cyber insurance if you're below $3 million. It just means that if you're above $3 million, it becomes a little bit more costly. It's a little bit more challenging for you to respond to a claim. Yep. It becomes an obligation on you. And so subsequently, we see a lot more businesses interested at that point. But SME businesses, micro SME businesses sub 3 mil, absolutely have a risk.
Yep.
And they need to consider some cyber insurance for sure. What's your view on where cyber insurance is going in the future? Naturally, Emergence has been around for 10 years. Cyber insurance has been around for a long, long time. It's been 20 years, or at least. But what's your view on where cyber insurance is going in the future?
I see a lot of cyber insurers, including us, going far beyond the realm of insurance to provide additional added value services, things like scanning, monitoring, help with developing incident response plans. I think that is the natural progression. It's going beyond the realm of insurance to help further protect your pool of clients and provide added value. I think there will be a lot of changes to what is covered and how cyber insurance evolves in that space. I think heightened competition will also fuel that. There are certain new wordings coming out almost every day, people trying to compete with each other. I think the next big thing will be AI and how that's really baked into the wording itself. There is absolutely no doubt that AI is here and it has been for 10 years plus. It's literally exists in everything that we use. We just maybe don't know about it. How that shapes cyber insurance, cyber policy wording will be something to look out for, in my opinion. But I also just think that the more businesses take up cyber, hopefully the more that we uplift minimum security standards and we will curb the number of incidents that we are seeing in this country. And future state of cyber insurance, it will become a typical standard insurance in a BizPack. Any business, consider any organization, you must have IT infrastructure to function. You don't have a laptop, you don't have a business, you do not make money. So in that sense, cyber insurance will just become another piece of insurance for every business in operation, and it will just be baked into your typical business pack.
Yeah, and what we see a little bit of is SME clients do find it at times a little bit difficult to obtain cyber insurance.
Yes.
As weird as this might sound, one reason it might be the risk measures they have in place. Two, it might be they don't know how to fill out the form. The proposal form that the broker or the advisor is sending them to complete, they often pass that on to their IT provider. And then that IT provider is a little bit frettish about how to complete that form, right? And so my view on where insurance or cyber insurance specifically is going, I think there might be some changes to how we collect information in terms of how we obtain quotes. I think it's a little bit archaic to always obtaining proposal forms. And I find clients at times struggle with the question around multi-factor authentication. It's like, we got our multi-factor authentication on Microsoft, but we haven't got it sorted out on Xero or Trello or whatever system they're using. It's not across all systems. So then they struggle to answer that question as a yes or a no. And they've got to provide a little bit of an addendum for that. We're starting to see in different regions where cyber insurers are implementing or experimenting with having clients download an application and seeing what the internal risk measures look like. Who knows if that'll take off? But I think there's definitely some change to occur, particularly with how quickly tech is advancing. Most certainly cyber insurance needs to change with it as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's funny to think about the fact that cyber insurance changes every single week. There's a new threat that's emerging almost every single week. The insurance industry, I mean, assessing a risk from an underwriting perspective, it is still quite manual. It's in that sort of process. So really taking a look at what internal measures do you have as a business. We are going to have to eventually adopt more scanning tools. But the issue with that is that you can only scan what's internet facing, and it is not a true depiction of the measures in the business. Yeah. We have those internet facing tools as well. We do use them from time to time, and we do produce those types of reports. But things like staff awareness training and human-related incidents that make up majority of claims, they're the types of things that we need to know to be able to better assess and price a risk. Yeah. And the thing with micros is that we do provide that assistance, like I mentioned, with completing those props, with talking them through the proposal form, as well as the insurance broker. And the lower revenue type clients, despite having minimal foundational settings, will still have a much lower and palatable premium. So I think the fact that we are in that soft market, pricing is coming down, it really plays into the hand or the advantage of those micros.
And it's great that you guys are helping with that proposal form component.
Yes.
It really is, in my view, the broker's role to help the client understand what that proposal form is. And this is a reminder for all small businesses. How you fill out that proposal form is your disclosure.
Correct.
The insurers can decline or agree to pay a claim based on how you disclose or how you complete that document. We've seen plenty of situations where clients see it as a bit of a pain in the ass and they fly through it. Yes, no, yes, no. That small yes or no might make a real difference as to whether the claim is paid. We've seen an instance where the client said they did have some staff training available. The insurer wanted to see evidence that the staff training was made available and shared with the team. So a reminder for all small businesses, when you're filling out that proposal form, rely on that disclosure, make sure it's done well.
Absolutely. And if you're not sure, ask.
Absolutely. Ask an advisor, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, mate, again, thank you for coming on the show. It's been fantastic to talk about, one, cyber, but your background particularly as well. Awesome. Not someone who necessarily has underwriting experience over the years, but naturally you've gone into insurance and you've now built your career moving forward. And it's great to see where Emergence has come from and where it's going. So thank you for your insights, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.